They laughed when her name was added to the guest list, until she showed up and made the host look small in his own mansion. You ever heard the kind of story that makes you stop what you're doing and say, wait, what did they just do? This one started at the corner of Preston Avenue and 6th Street in a high-rise office building in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. Not LA, not Miami, Tulsa, where people pretend to be humble but keep score better than Wall Street. Richard Beaumont was the name. 58, white, suit pressed so clean it looked allergic to dust. Real estate mogul. Made his millions buying up half of downtown during the 2008 crash. While families were losing homes, Richard was gaining properties. That kind of guy. He wasn't evil, just detached. His life was private jets, scotch older than your grandma, and friends who laughed too loud when the joke wasn't funny, especially if he was the one telling it. And then there was Marcia Bell. Marcia worked the 6 p.m. shift. Black, 51 years old, widowed, mother of 2 boys, both grown now. She didn't move like someone trying to blend in. She had that steady walk, head always held just high enough to remind people she knew her worth, even if they didn't. Hair tied back in a wrap, cleaning cart always tidy. When she sang while she worked, and Lord, she could sing, some of the younger employees would peek their heads out just to listen. But folks like Richard, she was invisible to them. A pair of hands, a mop bucket, nothing more. Now here's where things took a turn. One Friday afternoon, Richard was in the lounge on the top floor, going over his guest list for a private party he was throwing at his mansion in Jenks. Not a birthday, just a celebration of success, he called it. Invite only, wine tastings, private chef, valet, real show-off stuff. His assistant, young guy named Chad, was reading out the confirmed guests. We got the McDaniels, the Parkers, Judge Tannenbaum, and his wife, your golf buddy Wes, plus 3 C-levels from the bank. Richard was sipping something brown from a glass that cost more than Marcia's rent. He set it down, leaned back, and said, "Let's throw someone ridiculous on the list, just for kicks." Chad chuckled, unsure. "Like who?" Richard smirked. "That cleaning lady from downstairs? What's her name, Martha? Mary?" "Marcia," Chad corrected awkwardly. "Yeah, Marcia Bell," Richard repeated with a fake southern drawl. "Put her on the invite list. Let's see if she actually shows." Now you'd think this was just a dumb, tasteless joke, some rich guy being cruel behind closed doors. And it was. But what made it worse? They actually printed the invitation, had it delivered with a gold wax seal like she was royalty, dropped it off on her cart like it was some lost letter from Buckingham Palace. Thing is, Marcia wasn't stupid. She found the invite after cleaning the men's restroom on the 17th floor, picked it up, read it. Her name was there, full and bold. Ms. Marcia Bell is cordially invited to an evening of elegance at the estate of Richard E. Beaumont. She didn't need to ask questions. That smirk on Chad's face earlier in the week when she walked by, she knew exactly what this was, but she didn't crumple it. She didn't throw it away. She tucked it into her bag, kept working, and started thinking. But what they never expected was that Marcia wasn't the kind of woman you played games with. That night, Marcia Bell didn't sleep much. She laid in her small but spotless duplex in East Tulsa, flipping that ivory card back and forth in her hands like it was burning a hole through her fingers. Her youngest son, Dorian, had called earlier, asking if she needed anything. She told him no, but her voice gave her away. He asked again. "You sure, Ma?" "I'm fine, baby," she said. "Just thinking." "What about?" She hesitated. "An invitation." "To what?" "To a joke I ain't sure I'm supposed to laugh at." Dorian was quiet, then, "Who we gotta fight?" That made her smile. "Ain't that kind of fight. This one's classy." "Then go," he said. "Let 'em see you. Make 'em sorry they ever opened their mouths." She didn't answer, but her eyes stayed on that invite all night. By morning, she'd made up her mind. Marcia didn't have money to waste, but she wasn't broke either. She kept an emergency envelope stashed behind the loose tile in the bathroom, just in case money. Most folks used it for bills or medicine. Marcia used it to buy a dress, not just any dress. She drove to a boutique in Broken Arrow where a lady named Sharonda did custom fittings for singers, sorority events, and a few gospel legends when they passed through town. "I need to look like I belong somewhere they don't want me," Marcia said flatly. Sharonda blinked. "Say less." 3 fittings, 2 silent prayers, and 1 swiped credit card later. Marcia had herself a floor-length emerald green satin gown that hugged her like a secret she hadn't told in years. It had a slit up the side just high enough to remind folks that modesty didn't mean invisibility. A shawl over the shoulders, heels that made her stand an inch taller than she felt. She even got her hair done, pressed smooth, curled at the ends, and added a little red to her lips, just like her late husband used to love. When Saturday came, Marcia didn't sneak out the back. She walked out her front door like it was a movie premiere. The Uber driver, young man, maybe college age, held the door open for her with both hands. "Ma'am," he said, eyes wide, "you look incredible." She didn't say much, just smiled and said, "Thank you, baby." The Beaumont estate sat behind iron gates and a half-mile driveway, the kind of place with too many rooms and not enough love. When her car pulled up to the roundabout, valets in black suits jumped into motion. But when she stepped out, green satin glimmering under the golden sunset, every head turned. Nobody expected her to show up, and definitely not like this. One of the servers at the front door stuttered, "Ma'am, this party is, invite only." Marcia didn't flinch. She reached into her small silver clutch, pulled out that ivory envelope, and handed it to him. He read it, twice, then nodded, sheepish. "Right this way." Inside, the party was every bit as pretentious as she imagined. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, a jazz trio in the corner playing something slow and expensive. Guests in suits and silk dresses stood in clumps, sipping wine they couldn't pronounce. Marcia walked in like she paid for the whole house. Heads turned, whispers fluttered like moths. One woman in a champagne-colored gown actually gasped. But Marcia didn't flinch. She made her way toward the center of the room, calm, slow, graceful, like she had nothing to prove and everything to protect. Richard Beaumont was standing near the fireplace, laughing with two bankers and a man in a navy tux. The moment he saw her, his laugh stopped. He blinked once, twice. "Is that—" "Yeah," whispered one of the men beside him. "That's her." But what none of them knew was that Marcia hadn't come to start drama. She came to teach a lesson they'd remember for the rest of their lives. You ever walk into a room and feel like gravity's been replaced with judgment? That's exactly what Marcia stepped into. The whole place paused when she walked past the coat check. Conversations didn't just quiet down, they froze, like the room collectively forgot how to speak. She heard one woman whisper, not quietly enough, "Who let the help in?" But Marcia, she didn't even blink. She moved like music, slow, poised. Her heels clacked across the marble like punctuation. Her chin held high, her eyes scanning the room, daring anyone to say something to her face instead of behind her back. She didn't need to announce herself. She was the announcement. A waiter, barely older than her oldest son, nervously stepped up to offer her a flute of champagne. She took it, smiled, and said, "Thank you, baby," like it was the most normal thing in the world. Across the room, Richard Beaumont was still glued to the floor, watching her with a mix of confusion and something else. Not fear, not yet. More like embarrassment wrapped in surprise. The kind you feel when the butt of your joke walks into the room looking better than your wife. He tried to play it cool. He straightened his tie, forced a smirk, and walked toward her with slow, measured steps. "Well, well," he said, his voice low but slick. "I didn't think you'd actually show up." Marcia turned to him, eyes calm. "That's funny. I was just thinking the same thing about you." He chuckled, caught off guard. "I was just having a little fun. Hope you weren't offended." "No," she said, sipping the champagne slowly. "It takes a whole lot more than paper and wax to offend me, but I did think it was interesting, sending a joke invite to a woman who sweeps your floors." His smile twitched. It wasn't meant to be taken seriously. "And yet," she said, gesturing around the room with the crystal glass, "here we are." For a split second, Richard had nothing to say. He wasn't used to that. People usually laughed, or backed down, but Marcia wasn't moving. Before the tension could settle, a familiar voice rang out. "Marcia, is that you?" They both turned. It was Loretta Franklin, one of the real estate agents Richard used to work with. A woman who'd known Marcia from her gospel singing days at St. Elmo's Baptist. Loretta was already making her way over, arms open, smiling. "Oh my God, girl," Loretta said, hugging her tight. "You look like a whole queen out here. What are you doing at this place?" Marcia smiled softly. "Apparently, I was invited." Loretta turned to Richard, eyes narrowing slightly. She said nothing, but the look said everything. More people started noticing, and one by one, folks began to do something unexpected. They approached her. Some were fake, sure, all tight smiles and backhanded compliments, but a few were genuinely curious, drawn in. And by the time Marcia had made her way to the buffet table, she wasn't alone anymore. One man, Harold Brinkley, the attorney with a thing for jazz, started asking her about her dress, then her background, then her music. "So you sing?" he asked. "I used to," Marcia said with a small shrug. "Now I just hum while I mop." "Something tells me you do more than that." She laughed, but behind it was a twinge of pain. "You'd be surprised how quickly folks forget what you're capable of once you start cleaning up after them." He looked at her a moment longer than was comfortable. Not tonight. A group had formed around her now. Real conversations were happening. People were laughing, not at her, but with her. Stories were being shared. Even a few compliments floated through the air, honest ones. And Richard? He was standing by the bar, watching the whole thing unfold like he was the outsider at his own party. He poured himself another drink, heavier this time. "Who is she?" asked a younger woman beside him. "Is she famous or something?" Richard didn't answer, because the truth was, in that moment, she was. But what Richard still didn't realize was that this wasn't the climax. It was only the setup for a reckoning he couldn't drink his way out of. About an hour into the party, the cracks started showing. Not in the marble, not in the chandeliers. No, those held up just fine. The cracks showed in people, in pride, in perception, and mostly in Richard. He tried to steer the night back into his control, gathered a few of his regulars, investors, lawyers, golf club buddies, and tried to laugh louder than everyone else, like Marcia's presence hadn't rattled something deep inside him. But every time he turned around, there she was. Not in his face, not making a scene, just there, talking, laughing, drawing people in like she was gravity. And for once, it wasn't him everyone was looking at, and the more they looked at her, the more uncomfortable he became. At one point, he cornered Chad, his assistant, near the outdoor patio. "Why the hell did you actually send her the invite?" he snapped. Chad flinched. "You said, I didn't think you were dumb enough to take it seriously." She looked at me that day like she knew Richard. What was I supposed to do, throw it out in front of her? Richard downed the rest of his drink. "Yeah, that's exactly what you were supposed to do." Inside, Marcia was sharing a story about how she met her husband, rest his soul, in a greasy spoon diner back in '92. A few people laughed. One woman teared up. "Girl, I don't even know how you got through that," Loretta said, shaking her head. "Most people would have folded." Marcia smiled, then turned her eyes toward the huge glass wall that looked out over the lawn. "I didn't have the luxury." Someone clinked their glass to change the subject. A man in a navy blazer leaned in. "So, Marcia, what made you come tonight? If you don't mind me asking." She paused for a moment, then said, "I came because someone thought I wouldn't." She didn't name names. She didn't need to. The crowd shifted slightly. People looked around, awkward. Some avoided eye contact. But a few, they nodded. Someone muttered, "Good for you." Outside, Richard re-entered the room, his eyes scanning for her like she'd stolen the damn chandelier. "Can I speak to you for a moment?" he asked, voice low but sharp. Marcia turned, slow. The group around her got quiet. "Of course," she said. They stepped into the side hallway near the guest restroom. Quiet. Empty. "Look," Richard began, already defensive. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It was a joke. Maybe not a good one, but still, you weren't supposed to take it personal." Marcia looked at him, steady. "You mean I wasn't supposed to show up?" He hesitated. "That's not what I said. It's what you meant." A beat of silence hung between them like thick fog. "You're making this awkward," he finally muttered. "No," she said gently. "I'm making it honest." She stepped closer, not threatening, but firm. "You're not uncomfortable because I'm out of place. You're uncomfortable because I belong here. And you didn't plan for that." Richard blinked, but she didn't stop. "You didn't think someone like me could walk through that door and hold a conversation, wear a dress better than your date, or stand tall without apologizing for it." He tried to cut in. "Now, wait a second." "No," she interrupted. calm, clear. You wait, because you invited me as a punchline, and now you're the only one not laughing. He looked away. For the first time that night, his face dropped the smirk. Enjoy your party, she said, then turned and walked back toward the music. By the time she returned to the living room, a few more guests had joined her circle. They weren't looking at Richard anymore. They were listening to her stories, to her jokes, to her truth. Even Chad, watching from the corner, looked different, smaller. Richard poured himself another drink, then set the glass down without touching it. But what he didn't realize was that the glass hadn't cracked tonight. It had shattered, and nothing about this evening could be put back the way it was. It was getting late, but nobody was leaving. Some guests were on their third drink. Others had slipped off their heels and tucked them under their chairs. The music had softened. Conversations got quieter, realer, less polished. And then someone asked Marcia the one question she didn't expect. Can you sing something? She looked up from her seat, surprised. It was Harold Brinkley again, the lawyer with the quiet eyes. I heard you used to sing in church, he said. I'd love to hear it. I think we all would. A few others murmured in agreement. Someone dimmed the lights without being asked. The jazz trio had gone on break, and the quiet in the room made space for something else, something different. Marcia sat still for a moment, unsure. She hadn't sung in front of a crowd in years, not since her husband's funeral. That was the last time her voice carried anything but dust and tired prayers. But then she remembered Dorian's words, "Make 'em see you." She stood, straightened her shawl, cleared her throat, and she began. I won't complain. Her voice came out low, raspy at first, but then it filled out, warm, full, and rich, like honey poured over warm cornbread. And when she hit the second verse, the room was dead silent. No wine glasses clinked. No one whispered. All that sound disappeared under the weight of her voice. It wasn't a performance. It was a testimony. You could feel it, every syllable soaked in years of grief and grace, of working nights, of scrubbing toilets while humming through the pain, of laughing just loud enough to drown out a broken heart. And when she reached the last note, her eyes were closed. But when she opened them, she saw it. People weren't just clapping. Some were crying. Not the performative kind either. Not the soft, polite tears of rich women at charity luncheons. These were raw, tired, honest. A woman in pearls whispered, That felt like my grandmother. Someone else said, she just took me somewhere else entirely. Marcia sat back down softly, didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just folded her hands in her lap and looked at the floor. And for the first time that night, someone walked over to her, not to ask who she was, but to say, thank you. Then another, and another. Even the woman who gasped when she first arrived came over, red in the face, and said, I was wrong about you. Marcia just nodded. You were wrong about you too. At the far end of the room, Richard stood in the doorway watching. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to spin the moment or make it his, because he couldn't. There was no recovery from this. The room didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to her. And the look on his face, that was regret. Heavy, ugly, brand new regret. Not just for the invitation, but for all the years he'd looked right through people like her. People who carried worlds on their backs without anyone noticing. People who showed up, did the work, sang through the silence, and still weren't invited. Until tonight. But even then, Richard still hadn't learned the whole lesson, because for Marcia, this wasn't just about pride. It was about reclaiming something bigger. The party didn't end so much as it dissolved. Guests left in twos and threes, a little quieter than when they arrived. Some hugged Marcia. Others just gave a small nod, the kind people offer when they've been humbled and don't know what else to say. Outside, the night air had cooled. The valet lane wasn't full of laughter anymore, just headlights and soft doors closing. Inside, Richard stood alone near the fireplace, staring into the dying embers like they had answers he couldn't find. He didn't drink again, didn't even move. He stayed there long after the music stopped, after the help began clearing the dishes, after the laughter had faded from the walls. Chad walked up, holding 2 coats. You want me to call it a night? Richard didn't answer right away. Then finally he said, How long was she here? Chad blinked. Marcia? Richard nodded. Maybe 3 hours? 4? Richard sighed. That's all it took. Chad shifted awkwardly. She didn't do anything wrong. I know. He looked around his massive home. The vaulted ceilings, the imported rugs, the marble he made people take off their shoes to walk on. And for the first time, it felt quiet in a way he didn't like. Then, almost as if he was asking himself, how long has she worked in that building? Chad thought about it. Since before I got there, at least 10 years. 10 years. 10 years of sweeping, scrubbing, wiping things that weren't hers, listening to conversations she wasn't included in, and still showing up every day with that same quiet grace. And what had he ever done? Richard looked back toward the hallway where she had stood, then said, barely audible, I don't even know her birthday. Chad didn't respond. What could he say? Meanwhile, Marcia sat in the back of her Uber, shoes off, green dress folded around her like armor she didn't need anymore. She leaned her head back, watching the streetlights flash across the windows. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror. You sing for a living? She smiled. Not anymore. You should, he said. You got something? She nodded. I got plenty. Her phone buzzed. It was Dorian. She answered. How'd it go? She paused. Let's just say, she said softly, they'll think twice next time they try to laugh at somebody who cleans their toilets. He chuckled. That's my mama. Damn right, she whispered. She looked out the window again. Tulsa wasn't quiet. It never really was. But tonight, it felt a little different. Like maybe, just maybe, someone behind one of those big glass windows had finally seen her. Not just her hands, not just her uniform, her. But Marcia knew this moment wasn't the finish line. It was just a reminder that dignity can walk through any door, as long as you stop waiting for permission. Stop. The next Monday, Richard walked into the lobby of the same downtown building he'd owned for over a decade. But this time, something felt off. He noticed the floors were shining brighter than usual. The front desk attendant gave him a polite nod, but didn't force a smile. And Marcia? She wasn't there. Her cart was missing from its usual corner. No humming echoing through the stairwell. No distant sound of a mop bucket wheel squeaking over tile. She wasn't late. She wasn't sick. She had requested the day off. No warning, no apology, just a quiet statement. You'll feel my absence now that you've finally noticed my presence. For the first time, Richard had to walk to his office alone. No one made space for his ego this time. Nobody cared about his suit or the price tag on his shoes. The building he owned suddenly didn't feel like it belonged to him. He sat at his desk. The same view, same city, same silence. But it hit different now. His assistant came in to review the quarterly numbers, but he waved it off. Later, he mumbled. Not today. He looked at the chair across from him and thought about Marcia Bell. Not the cleaning lady. The woman who walked into his house like it was hers. Not to shame anyone, but to remind them what grace looks like when it wears heels and won't shrink down to fit a room. He didn't know what to say to her if he ever saw her again. There wasn't a speech or a check or a plaque big enough to cover the mess he made. And honestly, that's the part that stung the most. He could buy buildings, but not character. He could collect friends, but not respect. He could throw parties, but not presence. Because that night, for once in his life, the richest man in the room wasn't him. It was the woman who showed up. Uninvited in spirit, but not in soul. The woman who dared to say, I see you. Do you see me? And everyone did. The city buzzed with whispers about that party, who she was, where she came from, but most importantly, how she made them feel. Not intimidated, not uncomfortable, just exposed. She didn't come to humiliate anyone. She came to be seen. And once they saw her, they couldn't look away. Back in her duplex, Marcia sat at the table, her green dress hung up neatly, her feet in a warm basin of water, sipping tea like the weekend hadn't just changed everything. Because for her, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reminding people who they overlook. The folks who keep the lights on while everyone else sleeps. The hands that clean the messes no one wants to admit they make. The hearts that carry pain with dignity. That night, she didn't just walk into a mansion. She walked into history. Not the kind you read in books. The kind you feel in your chest. And maybe next time someone thinks about throwing out a joke at someone else's expense, maybe they'll think of Marcia Bell, and maybe they'll realize class isn't bought, it's carried. If you've ever felt like someone underestimated you, ignored you, or tried to make you feel small, remember this: you don't need permission to take up space. You don't need wealth to carry dignity. And you don't need a title to change the room you walk into. Be like Marcia, stand tall, show up, and let the room adjust to you.